there's lots and lots of moving parts. That means that the square meter rate is not a true reflection of this build versus this build versus this build.
I don't think you put it
Did you hear what the square meter rate is these days? The problem with that is it's such an arbitrary number. In reality, every build is still a one-off build. Probably going to get ripped to shreds for that, but it's the reality. Like every site is different. It's a different size. And when people ring me up for a price, one of the first things I'll do is say, oh, we built XYZ house and it was 130 squares. I won't say the rate, but you can pretty much work out the rate by dividing that amount of money by this amount of square meters. Hey, I'm Josh, a builder here in New Zealand, and this video is all about square meter rates. What is a square meter rate? Why do we use it? The pitfalls with using a square meter rate, and what you should be doing instead. If you haven't already, go ahead, hit that subscribe button for more building related content. So, real basics, this is your house here, and you're going to build it for this much money here, and this is the floor plan of that house. Basically, you just take this pot of money and divide it by this floor plan in a real crude, rough, ready way. That's your square meter rate. For example, a house may cost you $450,000 to build and it's 150 square meters. The square meter rate is $3,000 a square meter. So the more advanced version of that is you jump on the computer and you have a breakdown for your job and you list out the tasks: establishment, earthworks, foundations, frames, roof, windows. You get the point. There is a long list of things to do, and then you start putting a cost to those things. So I'll bring up the back costing. I can look at the section nobody wanted, and I can look at the drill piles, and at the time I spent 103 hours and we used one pump and $4 grand of concrete and the digger driver's fee. So I can look at that job and say, well, if that was 57 holes to 4 meters deep and that cost that much, now I'm giving my clients an estimate on 59 holes to 1.5 meters deep. I can use that. Yeah, a little trick tip about how we use old jobs to price new jobs. I suppose because there's so many pieces to a house, it's a really simple, fast way to work out a ballpark figure to build a house. And that works to get the ball rolling, but the problem is every site, every client, their tastes, wants and needs, and therefore every build is different. And you could have a really little house with lots of amazing features, or you could have a really large house that's reasonably simple with lots of wide open spaces, and total build cost could overall be the same, but this one here is triple the size of this little bespoke amazing thing here. By all means, look at a square meter rate as a starting point, but what you need to do is look beyond the square meter rate and ask, what are the specifications? Like, what's your kitchen allowance? What's your bathroom allowance? What's your insulation? Basically, you've got to work out what are you getting for that total build cost spent. Does it include right down to things like landscaping? Does it include consent fees or not? So as we see a little bit more intensification going on, we're seeing smaller and smaller 3-bedroom dwellings being built. So for example, a couple of years ago, a common 3-bedroom home would be about 150 squares. Nowadays, I'm seeing a lot of 110, 130 square meter, depending if it's got a garage or not, could only be 100 square meter builds coming through. They're still going to have the same cost kitchen, the plumber's still going to charge the same, they're still going to have the same amount of internal doors. Lots of things, whether it's this big or this big, it's going to have the same base rate elements, but now instead of dividing the cost of all these elements over 150 square meters, we're only dividing those base rate elements over 100 square meters. Sure, there's things like, to make a slab 100 meters or 150 meters, you're using an extra, give or take, 5 cube of concrete. And you're using extra materials like extra jib, extra steel. But as the houses get smaller and smaller, there's other complications. You're now building on tighter sites. There's lots and lots of moving parts. That means that the square meter rate is not a true reflection of this build versus this build versus this build. You want to work with someone who's building up an individual costing for your specific site and your specific build. You want to be working with someone who understands your needs and where you want to spend money and where you want to trim it back. And unfortunately here in NZ, we're a long way off being able to just punch out the same builds over and over and over and have that systemized, locked in cost. In reality, every build is still a one-off build. Probably going to get ripped to shreds for that, but it's the reality. Like every site is different. It's a different size. Every address that our subbies go to is another establishment cost for them. Even when you're doing multiple units on a site, there's still a bare minimum cost to get into that unit and do that work and then go next door and do that work. There will be some economies of scale and things do come down. There's always things to counteract that as well. I think a lot of people think that square meter rate is like this linear line, and if I shave off 10 square meters, I'm going to shave that average price off the total build. But as the house gets smaller, you still have those core base costs. What is going to be the total build cost for your build? And understanding the individual items in that are making your cost. Some of those things are going to be fixed and they're going to be that price whether you build this big or this big.